So, Hare Krishna, dear ladies, and welcome to the April Urban Devi Sangha and Women's Discussion Group, and a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. If you are joining us for the first time, please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello. My name is Damodar Priya Devidasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Devidasi or Rukmini Walker, as well as Surabhi Govinda Devidasi and Narataki Radha Devidasi. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. We have Nancy Rothman, and Nancy received her BS in chemistry from Union College and her MS and Ph.D. in chemistry from Brandies University. In her professional career, she has been the division director of 2 national environmental laboratories and CEO and principal scientist of New Environmental Horizons, a woman-owned environmental consulting company. She has retired from environmental consulting. However, she still assists the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in developing guidance for site remediation. Nancy has over 43 years of recovery from alcohol and uses her experience, her strength, and hope to help others who are struggling in their addictions to change their attitudes and behaviors so they may lead happy and joyous lives. Over the years, Nancy has counseled many women and men who have faced abusive relationships in their families, work, and communities, and she helps these people bravely find their voice to face the issues square on, and then helps them to establish appropriate boundaries to stop the abuse. And so today, Nancy's going to be speaking on recovery from our past, introduction to adult children of alcoholics or ACA, and dysfunctional families. And she's going to help us kind of see how growing up in a family that's dysfunctional due to alcoholism, drug addiction, mental illness, abuse, or even neglect can leave scars that affect us for our entire lives. And a lot of times we don't understand why we have trouble in our current relationships, even though we have left our families of origin. So Nancy will discuss with us the traits of an adult child and the program of recovery. So welcome, Nancy. We're so happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And now I've got to find my presentation, even though my dear sister, Damodar Priya, helped me to do this before I started, but I still am a little. Now, can everybody see that? Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Damodar Priya and Surabhi and Nartaki for being here. And then, of course, my dear friend, sister, mother, guru, Rukmini Walker, for volunteering me to do this. So, as Damodar said, we're going to be talking about recovery, and I want to give an introduction to ACA to you all because it's such an important program to me. So, what is I'm going to get this waiting room out of the way. It seems to be deciding it wants to be on my screen. An adult child is somebody that, as an adult, is reacting to situations today as an adult with self-doubt, self-blame, and a sense of being wrong or inferior as a result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. And as this picture shows, there can be this trait of generational trauma that down through the generations, the trauma that previous generations passed on can be passed down through to you as well. I want to make sure you understand, and Damodar Priya did discuss this, you don't have to come from a family where there was alcoholism in the direct family. You don't realize it. Alcoholism is a minor component to what I'm going to be talking about. However, qualify as Damodar did tell us, I am an alcoholic, and I've been sober for over 43 years through 12-step recovery. My father was an alcoholic who got sober when I was 9 years old. Both my grandfathers were alcoholics, and based on the wonderful stories I've heard, I think my great-grandfathers were also alcoholics. I have 3 brothers, twin brothers who are 9 years older, and a brother who's 13 years older, and I was the, quote, oops baby. And when I was born and my mother was 41 in 1956, that was pretty old in those days for a baby. And it turns out that most of the dysfunction that I felt in my life did not come from the alcoholics, but it came through my mother, who was not an alcoholic. And I'll talk about that. So abuse comes in many different forms. We can have verbal attacks, screaming and yelling in the family. It might be at you, or you witness between parents, or a parent and a sibling, which can be very disturbing. Physical fighting, the belt comes out, the corporal punishment that can happen. There can be sexual abuse that comes within the family or from outside that can affect you in a dysfunctional way. Mental illness, there's um, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. It can be many different things. Erratic behavior, one day I walk into the house and it's, everything's great. The next day, the same circumstances, and, there's all sorts of problems. I never know what to expect. And then neglect. I need nurturing. I am feeling a certain way, but my parents are there, not there for me. So the abuse, and this is not the whole range of abuse, but just to give you a feeling that it's not that mom and dad are sitting there drunk on the couch all the time is the only form of abuse that can happen. But that might have been your story. So what happens is when we suffer this kind of abuse, we can develop survival traits to cope with the abuse. And in ACA, that's Adult Children of Alcoholics, that program of ACA, this laundry list is called, excuse me, the survival traits are called the laundry list of traits. And I'm going to go through them with you now. And you may or may not have felt any of these or identify with these. First one, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. Oh, I can identify with that. We became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. Check. We're frightened by angry people and any personal criticism. We either become alcoholics, marry them, or both, or find another compulsive personality, such as a workaholic, to fulfill our sick abandonment needs. We live life from the viewpoint of victims and are attracted by that weakness in our love and friendship relationships. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it's easier for us to be concerned with others than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults, etc. We get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. We become addicted to excitement. We confuse love and pity and tend to love people we can pity and rescue. We have stuffed our feelings from our traumatic childhoods and have lost the ability to feel or express our feelings because it hurts too much. We judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. We're dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings, which we receive from living with sick people who are never there emotionally for us. Alcoholism is a family disease, and we became para-alcoholics and took on the characteristics of that disease, even though we did not pick up a drink. Para-alcoholics are reactors rather than actors. So let me define para-alcoholic, and this is a clear picture of my mother. She had the ism, not the alcohol, but she had the ism, which is a self-centeredness, a selfishness, an egotistical nature, childish, manipulative, sort of unstable, but she didn't pick up a drink. And it was really caused by what she felt, the generational trauma. But I really reacted mostly, or my reactions in the dysfunction came from the para-alcoholic. My father, the alcoholic directly in my family, was my knight in shining armor, the guy that I completely understood, who took care of me. And I'll say right from the outset, I'm going to give you a lot of examples from my experience, but I grew up in a really lovely home. But it was different. And I think that anybody who has a family is growing up in dysfunction. So how do I recover? we have a soul wound, and that's a term ACA has, and I really love that term. Um, Although it hurts to love that term, sort of. But this soul wound won't heal without facing and understanding how my upbringing affected me. And just jumping back one slide, the slides where I talked about those survival traits, you may identify with all of them or none of them or just a few of them. I know the first time they were read that I heard them about 7 years ago, my eyes welled up with tears and I felt like something was breaking open inside of me because I had never thought of these things. Although I had been doing 12-step recovery work for over, 43 years, this was new to me. So, how do we recover? By doing the 12 steps of recovery. And when we do these and we go through the whole process, we learn to set healthy boundaries, we learn a clarity about ourselves, and we can develop emotional sobriety. Now, the 12 steps of recovery I'm going to describe are offshoot of the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 steps of recovery developed in 1935. These steps were developed in the 70s, but it's the same steps that are used in Al-Anon, which is a program for people who are friends of alcoholics, or Overeaters Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous. So this is a proven way of recovery from trauma. So the first step, we admitted we were powerless over the effects of alcoholism or other family dysfunction, that our lives had become unmanageable. So there's a difference between powerlessness and helplessness. When I was younger and things were getting a little out of control, I was helpless to do anything about it. I was also powerless, but today I'm no longer powerless. I can do something. I'm not helpless to just take it. I can do something instead. And so there is a difference between helplessness and powerlessness. Sort of a mantra that emerges in ACA for people who are adult children is the phrase, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. We can't talk about what's going on in the house. We don't trust other people, and we don't want to feel these feelings. So don't, you know, bring up items outside of the house. Um, And I do use this last line in ACA. Sometimes we'll talk about whether we identify as a family hero, a lost child, a scapegoat, or a mascot. However, after I wrote this slide a few days ago, I thought, I was labeled all the time, and I don't know if you can identify with that, but you were the problem child, you were the one that always the good girl, whatever. So I'm a little reluctant, but I certainly was the lost child. I knew that my mother didn't want to be a mother anymore. She was done being a mother when I was born, and that became evident as time went on. So but you might hear these terms if you go to ACA meetings, and therefore I wanted to put these up. The second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So the tricky part here is that our first higher powers were our parents or caregivers. And sometimes when we think of a higher power, we'll start to attach characteristics from our dysfunctional parents, perhaps to that higher power. If you were routinely subjected to corporeal punishment, perhaps you think that, oh, it's got to have a punishing higher power. Oh, no. But here we're asking everyone working this program to try to seek something greater, something bigger than ourselves and bigger than what we might have expected. So we try to do something different. And then we say, restore me to sanity. Well, what is insanity? And for me, insanity was repeating the same mistake over and over again, expecting a different result, right? This is like numbing my feelings by taking alcohol and drugs or stuffing it with food or having uncontrolled sex, or dissociating, having out of body experiences or fantasizing and just trying to, whatever's happening around me, there are people who can absolutely shut down completely, even though there's the screaming and the yelling or the trauma, just they're not present. For me, when it was funny, I was at a meeting before this, in person meeting, but for me, I got a shame hit my insanity is that the minute that things get chaotic, I go into a shame hit, which is I start reliving all of the shames of my past. Remember when you got fired from that job or when you forgot to do your homework. And the crazy, absolutely crazy thing, this is part of my insanity, is continuing to go into the shame or codependence. I mean, how many of us have kept on having this relationship with a friend who wasn't there for us, but we keep on doing it because this time it's going to be different. So the second step, as I'll talk about when we get to the 11th, keeps on changing and growing. It's not a one and done in my experience. The third step is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over the care of God as we understand God. So here we using the second step and what we develop as a relationship is we develop a loving parent. No longer am I going to be having a parent who is my birth parent who may not be such a loving and caring person or entity. Instead, I'm going to have somebody or something that when something is happening in my life will say, just relax, take a deep breath. You're loved. I'm here for you. And this where we try to learn the act of surrender, that we sort of let go and we decide we're going to do something different. Now comes the big steps, the work, the hard work. And this is hard up to here, but the hard work starts with the fourth step. And I think that this idea of making a decision also is saying, I'm willing to do the remaining work because it's important. So the fourth step made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Thumbs up? Yes, okay. All right. All right. The fourth step is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And here I talked about looking at family secrets. And we try to look at the origin of the laundry list traits. If you felt that a survival trait made sense to you, for example, you were addicted to excitement, maybe you sit back and say, oh, you know what? We used to go to the county fair with my parents, and it was the only time that my dad wasn't drunk, and it was such a great time. And maybe that's why I'm always addicted to excitement. We gain an understanding of things such as denial. So when we gain an interest of like harms done to us and by us, it really is important because this isn't just about what happened in the past. It is also about what's happening right now for us, and how we are dealing with life today. And so, for example, perhaps we were ignored and neglected. And then we start looking at our current relationships and we realize that we're ghosting our friends and we're saying, oh, I'm harming others by repeating the behavior that I felt when I was younger. Stored anger. This was something that I didn't think I had. People who know me are like, oh, she's not angry. But I'll tell you an anecdote about this. So my mother used to say to me, I don't understand why you don't read. When I was your age, I read everything. I'd go to the library twice a week. I would a voracious reader, and all you do is, you do your work, but then you watch TV. I was famous for watching old movies. Well, when I was about 16, I hurt my knee, and my mother took me to the doctor, and the doctor asked, what happened? I said, well, I walked into the back of a car, and said, how did you walk into the back of a car? I said, well, the car had already passed and I decided to cross the road. And he looked at my mother and said, I think you better take her to an eye doctor. And I went to an eye doctor and the doctor said, tell me where you see the spot. And this has nothing to do with 20/20 vision because that's what I had. And I said, see the spot? I don't understand. Well, where on this wall do you see the spot? And I said, well, there's one spot here down in the lower left corner and another spot up in the upper right corner. And he said, oh, you've got to take her to the specialist. And it turned out it's something called binocular fusion, which was found when I was about 16 years old, which meant that I saw my brain was not putting together the two images from my eyes. So I was seeing both the right and the left side of vision at the same time. And I ended up having a problem trying to put these images together so that I could actually read. So what was the stored anger for me? It was me saying, my mother kept on saying, I don't understand why you don't do this, but she never read a book to me. And I realized that if my son, by the age of 5, didn't know how to read, I would have known. And so I had things like that, the stored anger from childhood that really started to get to me. Or post-traumatic stress disorder. You might know this from, we hear this about soldiers, but in fact, I have a friend, I think, who's on the Zoom. These can be smells, sounds, phrases. So this friend had a great new relationship with a very wonderful person who one day was kidding around and said, oh, shut up, right? And she immediately became flushed. She had the hair on the back of her neck started to stand on end. And she now, because she's done this work, had a voice and would say, please don't say that phrase to me ever again, because this is what my father said to me all the time, shut up. And so it's a physical reaction to something it's sort of traumatic that we feel. And we have a lot of things that are uncovered during the 4th step. And this morning at a meeting, a friend told me, this phrase, a victim will never recover. And it's true that if I stay as a victim, I'm not going to recover. Instead, I'm going to continually have problems. But this friend this morning had this phrase, which I really liked. As a child, I was a victim, but as an adult now, I'm a volunteer. So I uncover everything. So this is where we start looking at how deep and how broad is my soul wound. Okay, Damodar Priya, next slide. So the 5th step is we admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And this is where we gain a new perspective. So for the things that my mother would say, for example, I sat there and I said, okay, my mother when I was younger, had an alcoholic husband who brought his alcoholic father, who had dementia, home to stay. She had 3 sons who were in high school that were having all their stuff. She had this baby that she was not really particularly interested in raising anymore. She was done being a mother. And so therefore, when me, who always did this with this household of adults, spilled milk on the table, it became a big ordeal for her. I also had a different perspective when I worked with somebody and pointed out that looks like your mother was jealous of you. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that she was jealous of the relationship I had with my father and etc. So I had a new perspective. It wasn't all about look at how much pain I had and suffered, and there wasn't a good reason for this. I found that there were some reasons. And as I'm doing this, I'm starting to understand my own defects and shortcomings, are also known as the barriers to relationships, because I'm realizing that I'm taking some of the things that I had done that were happening in the past and assigning them to current relationships. And it was also a place where I started to understand grief. And in ACA, grief here is a measure of the distance between what I wanted my childhood to be and what my childhood actually was. And so that distance is sort of, understanding that, well, I can't change the childhood, and ACA is not about me changing my family of origin. It's not about rewriting the story. It is about understanding why I might have that grief and how I can turn that into something useful for myself. Next slide, please. The 6th step is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And I know these terms can be jarring, but if we don't do this kind of work, if we don't continue on, the soul wound we might have recognized in the 4th step, I think sometimes will scab over and cause us even more pain. So we have to really work at coming through to the other side on this. So the defects and shortcomings are a consequence of the survival traits. So, for example, something that's a barrier to relationships, like procrastination, it might arise from being afraid of abandonment. I'm going to stay in this relationship no matter what, because if I don't stay in this, I'm going to be alone. Or I can have controlling behavior or lie to just keep on seeking approval from others. I don't want to be seen to be making any mistakes. I have to be viewed as being, completely intact and etc. in order to feel healthy. Next slide, please. The seventh step is we humbly asked God to remove these shortcomings. So here we gain clarity on how we show up in life, right? And how we would rather show up. So, for example, I have a defect of character of being controlling, and it could also be controlling is a nice word for it, but it could be manipulative, trying to make everything work out the way I want it to. But I start thinking about that and I say, well, wait a minute. I believe that a higher power is guiding me in this world, even on this Zoom call. But if I start trying to, manipulate everybody else, I feel like I'm actually slapping their higher powers in the face. And when I think of it that way, that's really jarring to me. And I say, I don't want to do that. I want other people to be allowed to have a guiding and loving higher power. Therefore, I shouldn't be trying to control them. And this is where we try to surrender and we say, I'm going to give this up. I don't want to continually be operating today in the same way that I operated in the past. And also, it's a process where we start to integrate the survival traits. That's the term that's used in ACA, where I try to change. So, for example, I was very fearful of making errors or of people pointing out any personal criticism. But if I'm going to integrate the survival traits, this is how I think of it. I grow when someone points out my mistakes, and I realize they're not telling me that I'm a mistake. Because I think that the core of me being afraid of personal criticism was that if you criticized me, then you were telling me that I was an error and I was a mistake. And so I start to realize these things about myself, and I ask God, please take these away. Next slide. 8 and 9 talk about made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, and made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So this is where we begin to forgive ourselves and others. So I can sit back and say, okay, some of the things that happened to you were the things that, like say your mother said were not great. And you acted out in certain ways. And maybe you just now have to just forgive yourself for how you treated some other people. And we begin to also say, how do I address things like wanting to forgiveness of family members? So, for example, for my mother, I actually had already forgiven her through my other 12 steps of recovery. I didn't know all of these stored anger things at the time, but I still had forgiven her for who she was. When she was 92, she looked at me and she said, I wasn't a very good mother to you, was I? And I was able to say, no, Mom, you did just fine. So it's important to come to a place of forgiveness. However, we have to do it with healthy boundaries, because it may well be that there are family members or other people that we really shouldn't be around that much. So, for example, establishing a healthy boundary when it comes to going to like a family reunion, we may well say, I can come for a few hours here, but I can't stay the whole time. So we protect ourselves, or I'm going to bring a friend with me. In living amends, you might have, like, say, a sibling who thinks you're completely crazy because they don't believe that they really grew up in the same house. And as Gabor Mate will tell you, no two children grew up in the same house. So they may, have a cold shoulder to you. And if that's the case, I just tell people to keep on lobbing the roses over the wall, meaning keep on sending the birthday card, sending a text, maybe making a phone call. And if they're not responding to you, you know that you're trying to do the next right thing. And that's the healthy approach. Next slide. 10, we continue to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, we promptly admit it. So we become conscious of how we're showing up in our relationships today. We don't try to fall back into the same patterns. If I was in a home, as I said, of neglect, I want to make sure that today I'm not causing neglect in my current relationships in life. And as I'm starting to fall back into maybe old patterns, I will stop and try to do something in prayer, meditation, and then realize that I have to go and maybe make an amends, apologize, or change the way I am thinking and what I'm doing. Next slide. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact and as with God, as we understand God and praying for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And so this act of prayer and meditation is really where I'm asking God for help, and I'm trying to grow in that relationship. And I'm getting the help to really try to move on from some of the childhood trauma that I've suffered, to be able to say I no longer have to live in that same place. I don't have to be a victim. I don't even have to be a volunteer anymore. I can live a life that's free from this kind of suffering. And for myself, speaking for myself, doing prayer meditation has really changed and bolstered the second step, which is, coming to believe in a power greater than myself. And the third step, being willing to turn my will and my life over to care of God, because now I have a different trust. I'm growing in that relationship. And so now the second and third step start to take on a new lease on life. Next slide. The 12th step is, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others who still suffer, and to practice these principles in our affairs. So am I actually being kind and generous in all things? Am I now changing how I interact with my own family, not necessarily only with my family of origin, but my own children or spouse or friends at work, how I'm interacting at work, in the world? Am I willing eventually to take somebody else through the ACA steps to help them? Next slide. So what it's suggested is that you go to ACA meetings and find a sponsor. A sponsor is somebody who has done the work already and that can help you to go through the 12 steps of recovery. It's very important. If you go to an ACA meeting, it will always be helpful to you, whatever it is. But sometimes we come into the ACA and a meeting, and it's sort of in the middle of their book, the big red book, and you're like, I'm not sure of what's going on here. But if you've done the steps already, then you have a real context of what's being discussed in the ACA meetings, and it can be extremely helpful. So this book that's shown on the screen, you can get it on Amazon. It is actually the workbook for the 12 steps of adult children, and it's a really great resource for doing the work. And then the last slide shows some resources for meetings. The Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families organization has meetings that are online and give you in-person meetings as well. And the Bhakti Recovery Group has many ACA meetings that you can avail yourself of as well. So I really appreciate it. I sort of am speaking very quickly because I know that you had to put up with a lot of issues with my internet, and I'm really sorry for that. It's now on, but I'm not going to try to go back on screen the way it is, because I'm afraid it'll go out in the middle of any kind of question and answer at the end. But
Nancy, can I stop sharing the screen?
yes, yes.
Okay.
But thank you, everyone, so much for being here. Thank you for your patience. And that I think that at this point, we're going to be going to breakout room where, did you
Yeah,
see me
now
now?
we can see
Okay,
you.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
No
I
worries.
can
You're
see you.
fine.
All right.
So
So
Nancy,
here
do
we
you want to
go.
just share the breakout question, and I'll share it in the chat as well?
Yeah, okay. The question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid, right? If you weren't afraid and you or talk about any of the things that the presentation has shown. I hope that you'll have a good breakout session, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes.
So welcome back, everyone. It's time for our Q&A and reflection section. This is our time to reflect back to Nancy about what we've heard that's inspired us, or if we have any questions, anything else that we want to kind of dive deeper into. So please feel free to either raise your virtual hand or write something in the chat, and we can go ahead and get started with that. But I know that Nancy, we actually had a question while we wait for people to kind of warm up to sharing as to how can we connect what you've shared specifically to Bhakti in terms of recovery?
Oh, thank you for that question. Well, bhakti is service through showing love and service to God, and the 12 steps of recovery are all bhakti is in all of those steps. At least in my way of thinking, it's really, something that I think that the idea that serving God and Krishna and turning my will and my life over to Krishna, praying to Krishna to have my defects of character removed or shortcomings, etc. So I don't think it's applicable to any kind of practice, but bhakti is the language of bhakti is woven throughout the 12 steps of recovery, I believe. Does that make sense? So thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for sharing also the link to Bhakti Recovery Groups, which we put in the chat as well. And we have our dear Rukmini with her hand raised so politely. Please, Rukmini.
I don't want to hog the space, but if there aren't other questions, I had a question. Oops, lower my hand. Lower my hand. I just had a question. Can you explain, Nancy, I have two questions. I'm not clear on the difference between powerlessness and helplessness. And I also don't understand the mascot. So those are my two questions.
Oh, in terms, okay. So helplessness is, I was in a family and whatever was happening in my home, I just had to take it, right? And I was powerless to do anything about that. And even today, I'm powerless to change what happened in my family of origin, but I'm no longer helpless. I have the ability to grow and change through the 12 steps, so I'm no longer helpless to stay a victim. Does that make sense? I'm able to, but I'm not here doing this work to try to change my family of origin. I'm not here to necessarily change the story of what it was like. I'm here to just work on myself. Does that make sense to you, Prabhu?
Yeah, so in other words, you're saying that I'm powerless to change the past,
Mm-hmm.
but I can choose right now how I'm going to act and respond.
Right,
And the helplessness was in your memory bank, you had to take it, that helplessness. But is it sort of like you're not helpless now? Is that
right, exactly, exactly,
okay?
exactly. And
Okay.
the idea of the mascot is, the comic relief, the kid that was always depended upon to, be able to, make everybody laugh or rally the troops. The hero is, I could speak to my family. My brother, the oldest brother, was a doctor. Oh, everybody looked to him for the solutions. I was the kid that ran away and hid whenever anything was happening. I was hiding. I was a lost child. And there were, so the mascot, I didn't have to have a mask. Maybe my one brother was a mascot, but I think the issue is that those labels are not necessarily always so relevant. It's just something that ACA will mention, and if you go to an ACA meeting, you hear those terms. It's helpful to know them. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Rukmini Prabhu. So Karen has her hand up, but before I call on you, Karen, we just had a quick question that seems like something you could answer very quickly. Are you taking on new ACA sponsees, Nancy? There's a
I,
question in the chat.
I am, but I can't take on everybody at once. I have my book here with these, you see these little tabs? These are the people I'm currently working with. I'm willing to have another tab there, but I can't have too many at once.
Okay.
So,
So maybe in the
um,
chat or later on, you can share how people can get on your wait list or however you can do
just
that.
contact, yeah, I'll put it in the chat how you can contact me directly. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for waiting, Karen. Please go ahead and share.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Um, I don't know if you remember me, where I can't even see. Where are you? Oh, there. We spoke because Mother Rukmini put us in touch back in
Oh
October.
yeah, a long
Yeah.
time ago. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I've been attending Al-Anon meetings here in Concord, New Hampshire, weekly. I don't. I think I've missed like one. Um, and also I'm doing a Bhakti recovery group session as well. And I did want to kind of repeat what you said, that it is just like Bhakti and Rukmini had said that as well. As we read through the text, um, all of the principles and the lessons are very much reflecting what I've been exposed to through Krishna consciousness. And I actually forgot what I was going to ask. So sorry. Um, wow. Forgive me. I'm really sorry, but it's been a really remarkable journey. And I'm really grateful for having found my way here. And oh, now this is and I hadn't really I wouldn't say that I grew up in an alcoholic family. My dad is famous for one beer, um, and um, it wasn't really like that. But as I'm hearing and being exposed to all of these things, I do see the pattern is very similar. And my dad, he was kind of like, yeah, he's sort of just not consistent, I guess, maybe explosive or whatever. And um, yeah, so I just wanted to say that, like, I really kind of resonate with everything, and I'm really grateful for all of that. And thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. Sometimes, you're contributing just by saying that you are doing this process, and that's helpful. So I see that Mary has her hand up, but we just have a question in the chat from Mana Mohini Devidasi saying, how do we know we are recovering if we're still in the middle of chaos in our life? So if you could address that before we go to Mary, please.
That's a good question. I think, yeah, there's a lot of us that continue to have chaos in our lives, but the one issue is, how am I reacting to that chaos? Am I blaming myself for the chaos? Am I saying it's all my fault? Or, I'm going to stay in this chaos because, it's all I can do. Because I think that in some cases we have to set boundaries. And I like the term for boundaries being structures that are healthy for you and me, right? That I sometimes have to say, I'm not going to be involved in this the same way. If the chaos is really, really bad, sometimes we have to step away from it and say, I love you, but I'm going to go and do something else for a bit. And it's really a matter of, through prayer and meditation, we start to feel, if we're chanting, for example, we start to feel something different happening in our lives. We start to feel an opening that's no longer, I am no longer a victim, and it really makes a difference. I hope that helps, that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Mary, for waiting. Please go ahead and share your question or reflection.
Hi, thanks, Nancy. I kind of forgot what I was going to say, but I will say this. Full disclosure, I have walked through these steps with Nancy. Really, after many years in recovery from alcoholism, and that's what I was going to say. A lot of times, and one of the questions that came up in our group was, do I have to be an alcoholic? Do I have to come from an alcoholic family to be an ACA? And the answer is no. I think that ACA goes back and forth with name change, that it's adult children of alcoholics and other family dysfunction. Because if you would have come into my home when I was growing up, we looked pretty good. Dinner was on the table every night at 5 o'clock. The clothes were clean. The kids were, fairly well behaved until, alcoholism really took hold of the teenagers as well. And I think the helplessness was the feeling that there's nothing I can do about this situation, right? That this is, I walked around for years thinking that the life that I was living, even in addiction, but even in recovery, the dysfunction and the inability to have relationships, that, well, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And I guess this must be God's will for me because this is the life that I'm living. And that was the hopelessness. The powerlessness was, in that family, I didn't have the power to change anybody else except for me. And these steps have given me the ability to see the difference between where I was the victim and where I was, as Nancy said, the volunteer. Because now I'm just sitting in it. Oh, it's just there's no hope for me, and it's just the way it is. And in doing these steps, I did. I came from, there was a lot of abuse in my family, lots of dysfunction, and I blamed my brothers for a lot of stuff. I blamed my parents for a lot. And what the steps helped me to do was separate what really was their responsibility and what really was their abuse and they needed to clean up that. But it also allowed me to see some of the things that I did, some of the retaliatory behavior that I had towards them, and how, because all of this spills into all my other relationships. It may not seem that way, but it does. It spills into all my other relationships. As Nancy said, when I ghost my friends because of this dysfunction that happened, 40 years ago. But these steps help me to clear that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for your vulnerability and really sharing your life experience. I think with topics like this that are so heavy, it really helps to hear from those who have actually gone through the process. And Nancy obviously is our kind of shining example of that, but also just those of us that are living our lives day to day. And we actually had a question come in anonymously, Nancy. So just as a reminder to everyone, you can share your reflections and questions anonymously by sending a chat directly to me. They're asking, they're a mother who is an alcoholic and they are currently in recovery. And they're just wondering how can they support their children through the process of what's going on and what they've put them through.
Well, I think how you can support your children is actually, if you are an alcoholic like me, go through the 12 steps through Alcoholics Anonymous, which gets into, resentments, fears, and other conduct and harms we've done others, and show your children that there is a solution. If they've been a witness to your alcoholism, you can tell them, I am working on myself. I am committed to changing my behavior, and it might not be overnight. I'm human, but I am trying to do something different. So that the best thing that we can do, I think, if we're a parent that has alcoholism, is to really, be gentle to ourselves, but also be gentle to our children, and to recognize that if there is generational trauma, that you know alcohol was my solution. You may think, if you're not an alcoholic, you thought, oh, alcohol is your problem. It's not. It was my solution to life. My problem was trying to live in this world without a solution. And my solution had been, when I found it, was alcohol and drugs. And now my solution is living in a world with a higher power, and turning my will and my life over to God, and to working with other people, and walking the talk, right? And trying to do everything I can to help others through recovery. So when the question was asked, am I willing to take people through the steps? People who know me, and there's a bunch of people on this call, I will always take people through the steps, because it has saved my life and has saved the lives of so many other people I know. So this is what we have to show our children, that there is a solution, and I'm working towards that solution, even if it's not immediate. just be sure that I am doing it. But it's not just attending meetings. We really have to work the steps, and I hope that's come across. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So I see that they're responding now that what they're really hearing is that in doing this process and doing the healing that they need to do with their addiction, that they're doing that as a service to their children
Absolutely.
and seeing that as a connection to service to Krishna as well. And they just want to know if that's what they're hearing
Oh, well,
correctly.
100%, 100%. Yeah, because anytime we work on ourselves, we're working on our family as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So we have time for one more question or reflection. If nobody else that is going to share openly, I do have another one that got sent anonymously. Whenever I read anonymously, then everybody realizes they could do that and they start sending it. So this question is in regards. Okay, I'm trying to read it and decipher. So what they're saying is that when they've talked to devotees about their traumatic past, what they usually are told is that they should just chant or do more devotional service. And nobody has ever suggested doing something like this, or they think that doing therapy is just going to put them more into that victim mindset. So they were wondering, how do they deal with that kind of feedback or advice?
Uh, my opinion of that would be to say thank you for sharing. Maybe you're right, and to go about getting help despite them. And get whatever help you need, because it really is very, very important. And chanting alone is not going to cure your alcoholism. Um, and so it's very, very important. The you know, if you're not an alcoholic, you're not going to completely understand me. I think this is why my mother was so jealous of me, was because I understood my father, because we were both alcoholics. And so we were like two peas in a pod. We got each other. And so it is very important that you just not debate with somebody that, and I can also say that the ACAs, and the person's not on this call, or I wouldn't probably say it, but they also helped with dealing with the dysfunction in the temple communities and in their experience. So it's not just family of origin dysfunction, it can be a community dysfunction this ACA program can help us with. So we just have to say, I'm not going to debate you. I'm just going to go on my way, and thank you for sharing your opinion, and do it anyway.
Thank you. And the feedback that they're sharing from what they heard is that what they're hearing from you is that it's almost like they're being asked to spiritually bypass and to just focus on the chanting and on devotional service without actually healing themselves. And
Yeah.
that maybe that's where the dissonance is for them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
And,
great.
yeah,
It sounds
I
like
think
that's
so.
what they heard.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it is time for our dear Rukmini to finish our time together. But before that, we just want to thank Nancy and just remind everyone that you can always share your feedback through our survey. And please look in the chat for many different ways that you can support our dear Rukmini and Urban Devi so that we can continue offering this. Okay, Rukmini, please.
Thank you so much, Damodar Priya. Thank you so much, Nancy. This was so rich. And I wrote so many notes in my phone. And yeah, I think, devotees, everybody's got an opinion on my life, but I should really hear what I can resonate with and express it in whatever healing ways I can, and find help from trusted people. Not, it's not just everybody's got an opinion and I have to listen to everybody in the prasadam line at the temple or whatever, But thank you so much. I'm so grateful. So I wanted to introduce next month on May 24th, if you want to mark your calendars, ladies, we have another wonderful therapist. She's a clinical social worker and therapist. Her name is Shamala Priya. And because it's springtime, this is really appropriate. She's going to talk about planting your heart and cultivating devotion. So she's going to use the metaphor of gardening because she's an avid gardener. She says, many of us yearn to be fully immersed in devotional service and the natural flow of giving and receiving love. However, balancing practical responsibilities while living in the world can be challenging. In this spring Urban Devi Sangha, Shamala Priya will share stories and lessons from her experience tending a community garden plot in Washington, D.C., and how it organically transformed her relationship to bhakti. Together, we will explore how to unlock your own secret garden and turn the seemingly ordinary into an extraordinary gift of love. So I think that's super beautiful. And I wanted to say also, Nancy was speaking so wisely about beautiful garden metaphors, so beautiful because it's all about boundaries. Like a healthy garden, you got to have a garden fence to keep out the wild creatures, to keep the good things in and the bad things out. So I think that's something that's said about boundaries. Healthy people have boundaries that keep the good things in and the bad things out, and unhealthy people have boundaries that keep the bad things in and the good things out. So I love this garden metaphor. It's all about bhakti and growing the little tender creepers of bhakti. So thank you all so much for being here. This is a really rewarding highlight of our month. So thank you, thank you. We're so grateful to Nancy and to Damodar Priya and to Nartaki Radha and to Surbi Govind, the co-host. So thank you all for being here. Hari Hari Bol.